Hey everyone, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to my second review in the Mandalorian series. This is for the second episode, titled Chapter 2, The Child. The child that the title refers to, of course, is what I will refer to in this review as Baby Yoda. This is merely for the fact that the species that he is a part of has not been given an official name. I know, of course, that this child is not Yoda. This series takes place well after Yoda's death in The Return of the Jedi, but for shorthand's sake, that is how I will be referring to this character. At the end of the last episode, the Mandalorian managed to save Baby Yoda from whoever it was that was had either kidnapped him or was protecting him. We're still not entirely certain about that. And he's making his way back to his ship when he's attacked by other bounty hunters who appear to be a gang of Trandoshans. He fights them off and eventually makes it back to his ship, which he discovers being stripped of parts by a sandcrawler full of Jawas. He gives a brief chase, but is ultimately unsuccessful in getting aboard the sandcrawler and recovering his parts. He, along with Baby Yoda, make their way back to Nick Nolte's Ugnaught character, who informs him that he would be able to negotiate with the Jawas, an idea that he initially bristles against, but realizes that he must do so in order to get his parts back. He goes with the Ugnaught to the Jawas, and after a brief bit of bartering, it's determined that they will only give his parts back if he delivers to them something that they refer to reverently as the egg. He's taken to a cave inside which dwells a large, hairy creature who really begins to hand the Mandalorian's butt to him. The Mandalorian is really having no luck in combating this creature. However, in the revelation of what was suspected of Baby Yoda's character, he ultimately uses the Force to stop this creature dead in its tracks and lift it into the air, at which point the Mandalorian is able to deliver a killing blow, with a kind of new appreciation for the apparent abilities of this Baby Yoda. However, the effort has left him exhausted and Baby Yoda falls unconscious. The Mandalorian takes this hairy egg back to the Jawas, who proceed to slice the top off of it and enjoy with relish the contents inside. The Mandalorian and the Ugnaught now have possession of the parts that were taken from the Razor Crest and bring them back to the ship, and through the power of montage are able to reassemble the missing components. Throughout all of this, however, Baby Yoda remains unconscious until the very end of the episode, at which point the Mandalorian has left the planet, heading off to parts unknown. We see Baby Yoda regain consciousness and look up expectantly or appreciatively at the Mandalorian. We're not quite sure at this point. So I have to say, like the first episode, I really did enjoy this one. I appreciate the fact that this episode, I think it only came in at about 33 minutes long. So it's quite a bit shorter than you might be used to for an hour-long show, typically around 44 minutes. However, because this is a streaming service and does not have to cater to the whims of commercials and commercial breaks, it only takes as long as it needs to tell the story. In this case, with this episode and the previous one, that's shorter than is typical. Perhaps in the future it will be longer. Either way, I appreciate the fact that they're not constrained by these kind of artificial constructs and can only use the amount of time that they feel needs to be able to tell a good story. Like the previous episode, of course, this episode is very dialogue light. The Mandalorian is a Mandalorian of few words, and there's not a lot of dialogue in these episodes, instead relying on the visuals to kind of carry the story forward. And what we see in those visuals is kind of this strengthening bond between Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian. Baby Yoda, of course, doesn't speak as well as he or she would appear to be an infant, and the relationship that develops between the two of them is very interesting, especially the fact that Baby Yoda uses the Force to seemingly protect the Mandalorian in his moment of need, whether this is born out of some sort of attachment or merely self-serving because the Mandalorian has been taking care of it and been its caretaker, protecting it from the Trandoshans and other obstacles that have come along. Now, The Mandalorian's feelings for Baby Yoda are a little harder to discern. Of course, we can't see his face, it's behind a mask, but we see him, kind of reaching out to the carrier that Baby Yoda is in, and, at times seeming like he's just shaking it to kind of wake him up, concerned that he's fallen unconscious, but kind of in this protective way. And it's really interesting to try and suppose what he might do when the time comes to turn this infant over to the people who have charged him with the bounty to bring him in. I can't imagine that he thinks that they have good intentions towards Baby Yoda, being that they are Imperials or former Imperials, and all these other groups are out to kill this creature. So he might see an inherent value in it, but also kind of warm feelings towards it, this kind of protective relationship. I definitely predict that we'll see a strengthening of that relationship and a wavering of his willingness to turn the baby over if harm will come to him or her. Meanwhile, I also have to praise the episode on the visuals. I think it's a very gorgeous episode. Again, like the last one, though, there were times where it seemed very dark, almost artificially so. And I know they're going for the mood that is conveyed by that darkness, but at times it just seemed a little bit too dark, which I think is unfortunate for sure. I did also like the fleshing out of the Jawas. This is more than we've seen of them in the past, and the idea of kind of almost a Jawa culture of trade and barter. Even though they stole the Mandalorians' equipment, they see it as proper that it has to be traded back for now. And we get a little bit of that juxtaposed with the Mandalorian's views and culture, saying that weapons are part of his religion, which, if you've learned anything about the Mandalorians from the Clone Wars or Rebels, you'll know a little bit more about that. Although at the end of this episode, the Mandalorian leaves that planet, I do hope we see Nick Nolte's character again. I was very surprised in the last episode that IG-11 is not a continuing character. He seems to have been destroyed. I might be wrong about that. He might show up again at some point, but also the fact that we're leaving this planet behind and leaving Nick Nolte's Ugnaught character behind seemingly seems like it's a bit of a shame with regards to the show, as I would like to see that character more in the future. So those are kind of my thoughts about this episode. Nothing really too in-depth, just kind of again feeding into that Western feel, the adventure of the lone gunfighter, and this new charge of his that he's in charge of caring for this infant, I think is an interesting direction for the character to take. So I want to hear from you guys. What are you thinking about The Mandalorian? Are you enjoying it so far? Are you like me and eagerly awaiting each episode as the weeks go by? Let me know in the comments. And what do you think is going to happen? What are your kind of predictions for the future of this series? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, of course, to the Patreon supporters for their help in bringing these videos to you. And thank you everyone else for liking, sharing, subscribing, and as always, just watching. I'll see you all in the next video. And until then, I have spoken.